Hello writer, and welcome back to my life. It's Writer Wednesday, the day that I give you my best tips and advice on the art and the business of writing and tell you how I do what I do as an indie author. As usual, we're answering a question from one of our $5 patrons on Patreon today, and today's question comes from Erica Drayton, who asks, how do you use the story grid? For anybody who doesn't know, the story grid is a writing advice book by Shawn Coyne that is much beloved by many in the indie author community, including myself. Shawn Coyne has been an editor in the traditional publishing industry for a long time. He's produced a lot of incredible good books, including Gates of Fire, which is just, if you haven't read that book, you gotta go read that book. But the story grid was interesting to me because virtually all writing advice books that I've ever read have gone into my outlining process. Because for me, outlining is where it's all at. That's where all the magic happens. And so I try to integrate every single new piece of advice that I learn or every new piece of writing technology that I learn into my outlining. So what happened was I got the story grid and I read the whole thing, and it's really good. It's a really good, insightful book. It's awesome. You should definitely read it. But then I tried to apply it to my outlining process. That did not work. Which is not to say that it couldn't work for you. Different people work in different ways. Whatever works for you is fine. And I'm not saying that anybody can't use the story grid for their outlining. But when I tried to use the story grid in my outlining process, everything stopped. I came to a complete standstill. If you know me, you know that I do very detailed outlines, and there's a lot to the outlining process for me. There's a lot of steps already, and trying to add the story grid to that was what ended up breaking the camel's back. I spent so long trying to analyze every single thing in my outline against the 5 commandments of story and the story grid itself that I just couldn't ever get the outline done. It ended up taking me so much longer that I basically never got started. But the key to that, I think, is, Shawn talks about in the book, it's a book for editors. And yes, he hopes that it's helpful for writers, but it's a book for editors. What I found and experienced personally for myself is that I couldn't do that deep dive of an analysis on my outline. Even though the outline was, very detailed. My outlines are very, very super detailed. But when I tried to do the deep analytics of the outline with the story grid, it didn't work, because no matter how detailed the outline was, it wasn't as detailed as an actual draft would be. And so it kept feeling like there were things missing in the outline that weren't actually missing because they would just come out naturally in the draft. And so I just kept trying to make things work back and forth, and nothing ever actually happened. I did not get a done book at the end of it. And so I just don't do that anymore. Now I use the story grid for the purpose for which it was originally intended. I use it for my editing. I don't actually fill out the entire story grid for every book. I will do it if I feel like the book has a lot of problems, but if I think like it's generally pretty good and it doesn't need that really, really in-depth breaking down of the problems, I will just use the technology of the story grid in a more general sense. Like Bloodlust was a big problem for a long time. So yes, I did fill out an actual story grid for Bloodlust and analyze it and figure out what was the problem, what was going wrong with this book. But on Stoneheart, the book that releases on Friday, it came out really good. The first draft was just already really good. And so I did use the story grid technology and mindset while I was editing it, but not the whole actual story grid itself. But in my own work, and especially now that I'm working more and more with other authors and publishing them, the technology of the story grid has just been incredibly awesome and invaluable. The 5 commandments of story, I think that you should just drill the 5 commandments of story until you can list them off verbatim in an instant, and that you can actually explain what each one means in 20 seconds or less. Because now when I'm reading a scene, whether it's my scene or one of the other Underrealm authors' scenes, I don't have this vague sense that the scene doesn't work. I get that sense that the scene doesn't work, and then I look at the parts of it and I'm like, oh, this doesn't have escalating conflict, or this doesn't have a climax, or whatever it is. There's also all of the advice that he gives in the book about like avoiding sameness, So in other words, you can have various conflicts happen to the character throughout the story. You will have various conflicts happen to this character throughout your story, you better. But you don't want the same conflict to happen over and over again. Just as one example of this, in Stoneheart, the book that releases tomorrow, Albert, the narrator of the story, returns to his homeland after more than 20 years away. And he doesn't want anybody to know that he's there. So I had 4 separate instances throughout the book of him trying to conceal his identity from a very powerful authority figure. That was just, it was the same conflict over and over again. So I cut it down. Now, it does still happen twice, but it happens in very different ways that display a marked transition of character in Albern from the first time it happens to the second time it happens. There's also like secrets. Like most good stories have secrets. There's always a lot of secrets in the book of Underrealm. You want to make sure that every character isn't keeping the same kind of secret. You don't want everybody trying to keep a secret about something that they've done. Maybe one character is keeping a secret about something that they've done, and another character is keeping a secret about something they're planning to do, or a secret that they know about somebody else. But in other words, spice it up, give some variety. And over and over again, the most important thing, the 5 commandments of story, have just always be thinking of those with every scene, with the book itself, everything. But for me personally, that is only something I can apply to my manuscript after it's done. I can't start doing that deep of a dive when I'm still outlining and planning it out. So the Story Grid is a fantastic resource. I think that every author should read it. I know every editor must read it. It's absolutely vital and essential, and I hope that you will use it to make your book that much better. Thank you so much for the question this week, Erica. I hope that you and others found the answer helpful. A reminder that my $5 patrons, like Erica, get these videos 2 weeks ahead of everybody else, and they're the only ones who can request topics for me to cover in future videos. If you want to become one of those awesome and incredibly attractive people, I really appreciate the support. You can also pick up the Writer Wednesday t-shirt, which is at the bottom right corner of the video right now. It tells people you're a writer, so you don't have to. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you to my patrons for their incredible support, and I will see you next Wednesday. Bye! Chewie, stop barking at the nice FedEx driver.